Hi guys, welcome back. So I did not plan to make this video tonight on a Thanksgiving night, but we had a breaking news. China asked DIDI to delist from the US stock market, and this is spreading a lot of fears right now. The HSI index is tanking more after a rough ride for the past 1.5 weeks. So I want to share my view on this. I think this move from the Chinese government, it's responding to this news that US is blacklisting 12 more Chinese companies. It's the Commerce Department and US export blacklist. I don't think China had planned this in such a short time. I think they planned it way earlier, but probably announced this right now to respond to that. This is probably one of the cards they had in hand, and now they're using it to get back. It feels like the two presidents meeting did not help the two countries' relationship, but it's just saying one thing on the camera and doing another thing off the camera. News like this, of course, is tanking the HSI, dropping near 600 points, looking very bloody, and driving down also the SoftBank Group. As one of the biggest investors of DIDI, driven down 5% now. This is a mega stock for the Japan market. I think this should be similar with Warren Buffett's Berkshire Hathaway. So for them to tank this much, you can see how big of a deal it is. And kind of predict what's going to happen to Uber tomorrow. As another biggest investor of DIDI, Tencent had dipped 2.7%. But the good news is that it had reached the very important support of 460. You see, the lowest it got was 460, and we had some little rebound after that. If we open the 5 minutes chart, you can clearly see when it got to 460, the volume got much bigger. So clearly, there were big institutions waiting for 460 support to grab the dip. So from the chart, Tencent had not been making lower lows, so higher lows and forming a triangle. Looks like it's forming the consolidation, forming a bottom. And right now we're testing the lower end of this support. And if this holds, then HSI would likely get the rebound after that. And if Tencent continued on this trend to make higher lows, then I don't see why HSI would make lower lows. But of course, this support has to hold. And if Tencent starts to make lower lows, then things will look pretty bad. Shanghai Composite is not dropping much, 0.5%, so it's just a really little back test from a run up recently. A few sectors are still staying green today, despite of the huge bad news and negative sentiments, so much fears. Still, the solar sector and the EV sector still remains green somehow. Mostly because the battery giant CATL is still slightly increasing a little bit. So holding the market, holding the sector. I know it looks very, very scary right now, but if Tencent can remain above the support and not make lower lows, then maybe the HSI will not make the lower lows than the lowest in October. And anyways, after so many days of dropping, I do think in the short term it should have some rebound first. So I would say there's no rush into making decisions and cut losses. But you will still have chance all the time to think if it makes some short-term rebounds from here. And even though the DIDI news look crazy scary, I do still think that we need to stay calm and think what's gonna happen. So I think this would for sure affect the sentiments on all the other Chinese stocks for sure, because this is the first time that a Chinese company is asked to delist from the Chinese side. Normally, in the past, it's always the US delisting the Chinese companies. That was the risk that everyone considered before. And if they could accept it, they would stay invested in the Chinese companies. But this time, it's the Chinese government asking this delisting. Then it's different than all the other times before. Suddenly, it woke up many investors, and it's like, wait a minute, it's not just the threat of the US government, the SEC delisting the Chinese companies. It's also the other possibility. So it adds more threats, more risk. So sentiment-wise, this is bad. And now we really need to think about the why first and second, the how. this would be the two important questions we think about. Why would the CCP do this? And how are they gonna do it? Why is that? I talked about it at the beginning. I think it's to respond to the 12 companies blacklist, but not only because timing-wise, maybe yes, but they couldn't have done it so fast, so they probably had it in plan for a long time. On the day DIDI went public, I had reminded the risk that the water might be too deep, as in there were so many parties and forces behind DIDI. So many things could happen, like power struggle and early investors waiting to get out. And right now, the same story is driving DIDI to delist, I think. So I think DIDI has somehow share a similar risk like Alibaba. Different forces, different political power, too complicated. And now what's more important is the how. There should be two choices for them, right? Number one is to take DIDI completely private. And this would mean buying back all the shares. And number two would be moving all the shares to mainland market or Hong Kong market. So if it's number one scenario, I actually think this might be a good news because the IPO price was 14. So there's a good chance they might buy back the shares at the IPO price since it's so new. And if that's the case, that means DIDI would have almost double from here. And because DIDI only stay above 14 for 3 trading days, so that means most of the investors who bought in DIDI have a much lower cost than the IPO price. So if they end up taking DIDI completely private at the IPO price, most investors can make profit out of this investment. In this case, I think it's not that bad. It would actually increase the credit, increase the trust for Chinese companies if they are giving it as such a fair value. And in a way, I think it would actually help a little bit more the sentiment too. Because right now, so many Chinese companies have dropped to a range that is lower than the book value. So maybe investors would think or relate that if this is an option, that means one day if they really end up taking the company private, it would still be higher than the current price by not just a little bit. I said that 2 weeks ago that a lot of the 13F reports from the large institutions for the Q3 would be out, so we could see whether large investors have bought into DIDI after the incident in July. And here you can see the list. All the green ones means they have opened the position in Q3. And that means it's after they've heard of the off-the-rack incident from the CCP. For example, BlackRock, 12 million shares. Even Soros, 2 million shares. Vanguard, 11 million. This one, 75 million. Quite some big names like Bank of America. HSBC actually increased their holding in Q3 by 248%. But at the same time, you also see some big guys reducing their holdings like Goldman Sachs, reduced 76%, still holding 1.7 million. And JP Morgan reduced 98% of shares. And Morgan Stanley reducing 84%. So you can see a lot of the big guys are holding DIDI, even though some have reduced. If the CCP doesn't deal with this issue carefully, they might make a lot of these big guys lose not only profit but also their credibility in front of their client because they were taking a big bet. They were taking the position after they knew about this political risk. So if they are losing huge bucks on this deal, they don't look good. So I think the CCP has to deal with this carefully. And if not, they are losing trust from all of these big guys, big names. And it's not gonna be good for the Chinese financial market. As I mentioned many times, that's what they want to grow. And you can see the efforts of the Beijing stock market. So if they are taking the company private with the IPO price, then at least most of these institutions can either make profit or at least get back their original investment. But if they directly move it to Hong Kong or mainland market, then it's more complicated because we're not sure what's going to happen. On the downside, the Hong Kong market right now is much less popular or positive than the US market. But the good side is that a lot of the companies in the same sectors listed in mainland would tend to have much higher valuation than the US ones. So both Chinese companies, one is listed in mainland, one is listed in the US. The one listed in mainland would have higher valuation than the US. This is how it's turning or heading to a direction anyways. I think it's a way that the Chinese government want to encourage companies to list in mainland instead of US. So at this point, the Chinese companies listed in US would have the lowest valuation. So it's more complicated if they move to mainland or Hong Kong. It could be down because of the black swan news, because of the less trading volume in Hong Kong. It could be up because it's less political risk. And if there is one news that says CCP is taking a share, investing in DIDI, then it could be explosive. So that's more complicated. Also, something to consider is that the Beijing Olympic is coming in February, and there is a huge demand for DiDi's business, the share taxi, and mostly new registered users. The travelers that come to Beijing, of course, they need to register. And right now, DiDi is off the rack for registration, so no users can register. That means there is a deadline and urgency for China to deal with this issue. And this would determine how would these international visitors travel within the city during the Beijing Olympic and speak a lot on DiDi's future. And as long as they don't get this, whether it's data security or power struggle problem solved by then, DiDi cannot go back on the rack and let new users register. So they have to deal with this before. Now, this is my share for what just happened with DiDi and what's gonna happen to the Chinese stocks. I hope that helped in any ways to ease some of the fear, panic, whatever. So if you have enjoyed this video, please give me a big like and write me a great comment, and I'll see you in my next video. That's it, guys. Hope you can find my videos helpful. Make sure you subscribe to my channel and give me a big like. Thank you.